Alrighty, welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here. Really looking forward to this presentation I've got for you today. First off, today's presentation is called "How a Fly on the Wall Helped My Mom Reunite with Me." It's a really good piece that I've put together for all of you. I'm really excited to go through it. But before we do that, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself just for the people who haven't had a chance to get to know me yet. My name is Andrew Faulkner. I was alienated from my mother for about 12 and a half, close to 13 years. And I reunited with her when I was about 18 years old. It was only after basically my alienator was a stepmother. It started when I was about 5 years old, when my dad remarried, and unfortunately that lasted for that long. And it wasn't until when my stepmother and my dad were divorcing that I started to see a lot of similarities in the way that my stepmother was trying to pin me against my father. Shortly after that, when I came back to the United States, I was living in Singapore at the time. I reunited with my mother, and I went through this really long journey of trying to not so much take back what was taken from me, because there's, that time will always be gone, but at least build something new for ourselves. And so a lot of what I had worked on with my mother, was just trying to learn how to create a new relationship, one that was stronger in spite of everything that had happened in the past. And so, before I get started, just really quick, a few housekeeping items. Just feel free to comment, connect down below in the chat if you want to access the free guide that Ginger has to offer. Everything that I do here in these, especially in these Facebook Lives, it's all made possible thanks to Ginger's program. It's Reversing Parental Alienation. It's a roadmap program. If you are interested in joining, you're more than welcome to look up the details and register at www.reversingparentalalienation.com/roadmap. So, how a fly on the wall helped my mother reunite with me after 12 and a half years of alienation. So it's getting to be summertime, and no matter how hard you try, you keep the doors and windows closed, no matter how clean the house is, somehow fly just manages to get in the house, right? And for me, I've got 5 cats, so when it happens, the cats go nuts. They're chasing the fly. And eventually, I grab a magazine and then pop, smack it, and I get rid of the fly immediately, right? But the thing is, I can only swat out the flies that I can see. Usually, there's always one little fly just on the wall somewhere. He's in the corner by the ceiling, just out of sight. And so myself, my cats, none of us can really see it. We don't even know that fly is there. And you might be thinking, all right, Andrew, what's this got to do with parental alienation? I'll just say, bear with me. You're going to see the analogy pretty soon. One of the most common things that I see, one of the big challenges alienated parents have, is they have this information gap, right? They don't know what's going on in their child's life, and so they're always playing catch up. They're trying to respond to their child's emotions, but they don't even know what's really going on in their head. And it can get really, really tough if you're in a position where there's severe parental alienation, where the child goes no contact with you. And that's what it was like for me in my case. I pretty much went no contact with my mother. It stopped really, like any and all contact stopped really quickly when the alienation began. And there were several instances where I would go somewhere between 3, 4, maybe 5 years without even talking to her. And it was really hard for her. And even those times when I did respond to her, it was usually just a moment where I was just saying something like, I don't want to talk to you. I'm busy. I've got more important things to deal with. And so I would just pretty much shut down any attempts at communication. I would do that basically when I felt like, oh man, my mother was trying to reach out to me, and I'd just be like, please just go away. I don't want to hear this anymore. I don't want to talk anymore. So it's a very common thing that people are struggling with. And yeah, but despite that huge information gap, somehow my mother always knew what was going on in my life. And this wasn't because she was communicating with my stepmother or my father. She wasn't getting information from them. So how did she have these major details in my life? How did she know what sports I was doing? How did she know how I was doing in school? And how did she even have photos of me growing up, with that information gap? And just to kind of show you how old I am, this was before social media became popular. So there was, this was before Facebook, before MySpace and Friendster and all those really old social media accounts. How did she do it? The answer is she had a fly on the wall. So the way it works is, the fly on the wall stays out of sight, but you see everything. And you see, my father had a very close friend who would occasionally visit. Okay, he didn't come often. It was, for him, it's a long drive. He has his own life to attend to. But the thing is, so like, we would always have these cookouts and barbecues, family parties, and he would always show up and visit us. And, he's always very friendly, very fun to be around. I always have had a lot of respect for him. I still do. More importantly, this is the most important thing. My stepmother, the alienator, really liked his company. And so she was always happy to invite him to all these family parties. And some of you are probably already connecting the dots, but I'm going to say it because I really want to emphasize how powerful this is. The fly on the wall was him. Fly on the wall is a trusted family member or relative who is there to be a part of your child's life without getting involved in the alienation dispute. So anytime he came to visit, he would ask us how we're doing. He would ask us what we're up to. Sometimes he took us out to eat. Sometimes I think one time he even took me and my brother to a hockey game. All those times that we spent together, even if they were just short little conversations, he never brought up my mother. He never brought up anything about the divorce or anything deeply personal. He would just check in, see how we're doing, ask us a couple questions, just the usual stuff that you would ask over lunch. And then later, the party dies down. It's time for everyone to go home and sleep. He would leave. We'd all give him a big hug and say, come back again soon. And he would say, and then maybe a few days later, he's on the phone talking to my mom and letting her know what's going on in my life. So in 2008, just to give you more context, I moved from the US to Singapore, and my mother was not informed of this at all. And yet somehow she knew. And during that part of my life where my father and my stepmother were divorcing, I had to leave Singapore and come back to the US. And some people who are familiar with my story know that in the process of adjusting to my new life, I came back to the US. It stirred up a hornet's nest because my alienator was incredibly upset that I had left without her knowing. And I'm in the process of blocking people on Facebook. I had like this impulse decision. I was like, you know what? I see my mother's name on the blocked list. I'm just going to unblock her. What's going to happen? And the day after that, she messaged me asking how I was doing. And I was so surprised. I was so caught off guard by that. I was like, even after all this time, after 12 and a half years of rejecting you constantly, somehow she knew that reaching out that one more time was enough to get me to realize, you know what, maybe there is something that I don't know, that maybe there's a part of her story that I should know. And that is what pretty much led to the domino effect of me reuniting with her. And, for a little while, I wondered, like, how did she know that I came back to the US? How did she know all of these things? And it all comes back to the fly on the wall. So now let's get into details, right? But the thing is, like, it's not just my story. I really want to emphasize that because, like, I've talked to a few people who have done something like this, and I'm trying to understand, like, what are some good ideas that I can share with all of you parents who are struggling. And I realized I was starting to see similarities in other people's stories. Some of you might follow Crystal Shivers. She has a Facebook page called AKA Kid of PAS. I know she's not that active right now, but in a few years back, she used to be really active and created a lot of videos and shared a lot of her own experiences. And if you follow her story, or after this presentation, you go through her videos, you're going to see that the person that she talks about the most in terms of that person who helped her push through the alienation, who helped her show up as her best self, who helped her understand the truth when it was over. Who's that person? That person was her Aunt Sue. And if you follow that story, you're going to realize that in a way, her Aunt Sue was a fly on the wall. This was somebody who saw what was happening and built a strong relationship with Crystal throughout the whole process, throughout the whole alienation process, And then when the time was right, when Crystal was ready to acknowledge that she needed to find her own sense of freedom, find her own path forward in her life, and define her life on her own terms, that's when her Aunt Sue was able to really support her in that process. And there's several other people I've talked to. I'm going to keep them anonymous, but what they do is they have somebody on the inside just keeping an eye out on their kids so that they can have some sort of source of information. They need to stay in the loop because the real truth is that the alienator is going to work really hard to keep you in the dark, right? Which is why I use that analogy of flies on the wall, right? Because like the thing is, they're gonna be looking around, keep their house spick and span. They're gonna grab a magazine, and the moment they think that something shouldn't be there, they're gonna swat it. So now I know the idea of having fly on the wall sounds exciting. I want you to bear with me, stay with me here, because it can be done wrong, and it only takes a few mistakes, and you put yourself in a situation where you lose contact again. So going full circle, the fly on the wall is harder to see than the fly buzzing in your face, right? Which means that your person, whoever you select as your fly on the wall, cannot get involved in the alienation dispute. They cannot share any judgments with your kid or the alienator. The only thing they can do is observe and offer support when asked. I repeat that again, that they observe, offer support when asked. And because the thing is, when it's unprovoked, when it's unsolicited, that's when your alienator is going to suspect something. And you don't want to be in a situation where your alienator suspects something because then your fly on the wall gets swatted. You lose contact, and then you also inadvertently has sabotaged the relationship between your child and that person. Plus, if your alienator thinks that you're sending people to snoop around and feed information to you, then it becomes 10 times harder to get someone else to help because, if they got the bloodhounds ready looking for anybody who might be in that kind of category, then, you're just making it harder on yourself. So I want you to put your journalist hat, your detective hat, whichever sounds cooler. And let's remember, what are the two most important rules of a journalist and a detective? If you watch a lot of spy shows or cop shows or, CIA shows, whatever, never reveal your sources and you never put your source in a dangerous place where they might get caught. The two most important rules when it comes to finding and setting up your fly on the wall. The reason why I bring it up is because it's too easy. Like if you're in a situation where you talk to your alienator a lot, maybe you're fighting with them a lot to co-parent, and it's too easy to go to say it in anger and like, well, so and so told me this, this, and this. You do that, boom, fly on the wall's gone, no more family parties, no more connection with your kid, and your source of information is shut down completely. The other thing is you also cannot ask, no matter how vulnerable you are feeling, you cannot ask your fly on the wall to pass messages on to your kid. So you don't tell them, hey, can you send this gift to my kid and say it's from me? Or hey, could you tell them to maybe send me a text message or answer my calls? Boom, fly on the wall is gone. You lost your information source. So again, just to reiterate, never reveal your sources and never put your source in a dangerous place where they might get caught. You're a detective or a journalist, whichever sounds cooler. And as a detective or journalist, you have to protect your sources. Now, we're getting close to the end of my presentation, so I want to wrap up with a couple tips for you that will be really beneficial for you. First off, you don't have to have only one fly on the wall. So earlier I was telling you, when I reunited with my mother, I noticed that she had a ton of my pictures of me growing up on her fridge. How on earth did she do that? Well, turns out my mother had so many flies on the wall just trying to watch out for me that my dad's friend was the one that was there in person the most, but she had people who would, for example, add me on Facebook. And I didn't really check who they were. I'm a teenager, I thought maybe it was somebody I knew, maybe it was somebody in school or a relative that I wasn't familiar with. They'd add me on Facebook. And it just so hhappened by adding them on Facebook, they can go to my profile, find photos of me and send them to my mother. I'd like to very quickly share a fun little trick that I'm not sure if you're aware of, but when you block somebody, they are invisible to your account, which means that you cannot see that particular person in the friends list of another account. So in my case, I had blocked my mother on Facebook at that time, but I cannot see my mother in that friends list of somebody else because that account is invisible. Obviously, be responsible with that information, but it's a handy little trick that really went well for my mother. I don't even think she knew that at the time. It's just one of those things where, it can help in the sense where, yeah, I mean, just being able to use social media to your advantage so that you can get a better idea of what's going on. Because most of the time, people project their entire lives on social media. Tip number two, fly on the wall goes both ways. That's why it's so important to not post about your alienation online. All those Facebook groups where people are posting screenshots of their kids being mean to them or rude to them, avoid them and do not participate in the commiseration. I understand that it helps you feel validated. I understand that sometimes you just need to know that you're not the only one suffering, but it is too easy to create a fake profile and just spy on your profile. It's just way too easy. Practice a level of online safety where you're just not putting yourself in a position where you're going to have a bunch of screenshots of you saying things that you said in anger and then having them used against you. Because sometimes that can happen. They'll pull that into court, or they'll just use that to file restraining orders, or even use that as proof to show the police to try and paint you in a bad light. Obviously, it's all very situational and it's going to be different for everybody, but you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself as well. The last thing I'm going to share with you is if you want to send any gifts to your kid, you can ask the fly on the wall to pass the gift to your kid. However, and this is critical, you do not want to tell your child that the gift is from you. It's a little white lie, I know, but you can say the gift is from your fly on the wall. Why? Two reasons. One, it increases the chance that your child gets to keep the gift, right? If your alienator finds out that you bought them clothes, they're going to throw it away. You send your kid money, they're going to take the money for themselves. You give them anything, the alienator decides whether or not they get to keep it. If it's somebody else bringing a Christmas gift, I mean, just like a regular gift, nothing too intense, right? Then it makes sense, and then it's like, okay, well, yeah, sure, the kid can probably keep it. Now, the second reason is if you do send your child a series of gifts in the future, if they find out that you are the one that were sending those gifts, it's one more thing, especially if they're in the process of trying to reunite with you. It's one more thing that will create a track record to show them that you have always been there for them, even though they didn't quite know it. Um, Keep in mind, though, that the whole process of sending gifts is just a way of showing support. It's not about getting credit or praise. So if you can comfortably send a small gift without needing credit or praise, then maybe this is something that you can do. Again, everyone's situation is different. Be careful while you're doing this because I don't want to be in that position where like I can only give general information on these presentations. I don't want you to be in a position where you might accidentally spend a lot of money on something and then find out that it didn't work for you. So just be mindful and try and keep your gifts to smaller gifts. Okay. Usually what ends up happening is that the alienator is going to cut off your entire side of the family. And sometimes that includes, siblings, cousins, and close relatives. So this is a really situational technique that you can use, but you can also look at you know people that are probably going to be involved in your child's life that you are familiar with that you might be able to talk to. So, for example, teachers, sports coaches, things like that. Again, you're not looking to ask that. You're not looking to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can you spy on my kid for me?" But rather, you're just saying, "Hey, can you look out for them?" And then you just communicate with them regularly so that you can at least stay up to date with what's going on in their life. When the child's especially living in a state of dependency or codependency with the alienator, they don't have the freedom to make their own decisions, and so their entire sense of survival is pretty much built into the systems and the rules of the alienator. And like I hate to say that because it doesn't really offer much hope, right? But at some point, the child's going to have to reach a point where they're going to have to decide, do they want to live a life on their terms or do they want to live a life on the alienator's terms? And that's usually where there tends to be a schism and they break apart. And at that point, you have more opportunity to reconnect with them. We're getting close to the end of the presentation. This is not the last time you'll see me. Again, everyone, I'm always happy to support you any way I can, and I appreciate all of you for joining me today. So feel free to share the recording of this presentation with anyone that you feel it might help. And wishing you all a wonderful day.